A recording exists. 4 seconds of it are the reason millions of people are talking about a 19-year-old named Nolan Wells. In the background of an emergency call placed from a sinking boat off the coast of Mississippi, listeners claim they can make out 3 words: Nolan, wake up, and then, near the end, a name. Bart. Nolan never came home from that boat. What happened between the moment he was last seen laughing on a beach and the moment his mother got a phone call telling her not to worry is now the subject of a federal request, 2 law enforcement investigations, and a war being fought in real time online. A phone call that never should have gone through. A family that has spent more than a month asking one question nobody in power seems willing to answer. To understand why that 4-second clip has an entire state on edge, you have to go back to the beginning of the day everything changed. On the 4th of July, Nolan Wells went out to Horn Island with a group of friends he'd known for years. By that evening, he was gone. Not home, not answering his phone because, as it turns out, his phone never left the boat. And in the 6 weeks since, what started as a missing person report has become something much bigger. A fight over a cell phone, a fight over jurisdiction, a federal request from the Congressional Black Caucus, and an online theory, unproven and directly denied by the accused man's own attorney, that has attached one name to this case above all others. Before we get to the theory everyone's talking about, we need to walk through what actually happened, in the order it happened, because the record here is messier and more revealing than any single headline. Horn Island sits inside the Gulf Islands National Seashore off the Mississippi coast, a strip of federal land with no cell towers, no real infrastructure, and by every account in this case, wildly unreliable signal. On the 4th of July it becomes, in the words of the young men who were there, the place to be. Multiple boats, extended friend groups, by some estimates, 200 to 300 people crowded onto the northwest side of the island for the holiday. Nolan Wells was part of that crowd, on a boat with a group that included Warren Hudson, a young man named Wyatt, grandson of the boat's owner Jerry Ackerman, and several others. Somewhere in the course of the day, according to the friends, Nolan met a young woman they identified as Katie McCormack, and when it came time to leave, they say, he chose to stay behind with her rather than get back on the boat. That's the account Warren Hudson gave in detail to podcaster and former officer Brandon Tatum. He described Wyatt calling out to Nolan, telling him the boat was taking on water and they needed to go, right now. And he described Nolan shaking his head, smiling, saying he had another ride. Nolan, get on the boat now. Nolan's like, no. Nolan, get on the effing boat right now. We are leaving right now. And Nolan said he had another ride back. That's the story as the friends tell it. But it doesn't stand alone. Katie McCormack's sister, Gracie, has said Katie's own recollection is different, that Katie believed Nolan was in the process of getting on the boat with the friends who were calling him, and that those friends wouldn't have left him behind. 2 accounts, 2 different final moments. And as of this recording, no independent confirmation of which one is accurate, or which boat, if any, Nolan actually got on. Hold that detail. We're going to come back to it, because almost everything that follows in this case depends on what really happened in that gap. According to the group, shortly after leaving the island, their boat started taking on water. The bilge pump failed, water rose high enough to submerge the batteries, and the electronics began cutting out. They say they pulled the drain plug at the stern and tried to run the boat on plane to force the water back out, a real technique boaters use, but one that takes both know-how and a working boat to execute under pressure. We're like, okay, this boat's going down, we just go into full-on panic mode, get this thing out of here now. While this was happening, Wyatt called Sea Tow, a private towing service, and reported the boat sinking, in roughly 31 feet of water, with about 7 people aboard, none over 21, requesting a pump and a tow. He declined an offer to notify the Coast Guard. Here's where the timeline gets tight. At almost the exact same moment Wyatt was requesting the tow, the boat's owner, Wyatt's grandfather, Jerry Ackerman, was calling the Sea Tow captain directly to say the tow wasn't needed after all, that the situation was under control. When the Sea Tow dispatcher, Vicky, later called the captain to confirm the job, the captain cut her off. I just got off the phone with him. I literally just got off the phone with him. 2 calls, converging on the same captain, canceling a rescue that had just been requested minutes earlier. Now layer in the reception problem. Multiple people in this friend group on multiple separate occasions have described Horn Island's cell service as unreliable to the point of unusable. One friend said he couldn't even send a picture message that day. Another described trying repeatedly to reach his mother before finally getting through once they were closer to shore. And yet, in the middle of all of that, a multi-minute, detail-rich emergency call to Seatow went through cleanly enough to relay GPS coordinates, head count, and depth. When asked directly about it, one of the friends could only say the coverage is different every time. Service off a satellite, unpredictable, sometimes there and sometimes not. That's not proof of anything on its own. But it's the kind of contradiction that doesn't resolve itself, and it's the first of several we're going to walk through today. There's also the boat's return. Despite a described mechanical catastrophe, a flooded bilge, fried electronics, batteries underwater, GPS data shows the vessel was towed roughly 2 3/4 miles before it regained power on its own, then ran under its own power at speeds reaching 34 knots, reaching the dock less than an hour and a half after leaving the island. No independent photo, video, or technical inspection has been publicly released confirming flooding at the severity described in the call. The video clip the friends later pointed to, showing the boat sitting calmly in the water while Wyatt was on the phone, is short, has no audio, and has no clear timestamp, which means it can support their account, but it can't independently verify it either. When pressed on why that clip should settle anything, one of the friends put it this way: if they'd had a body on board, wouldn't the footage show someone lying on the deck, or the group scrambling into a confined space to hide something? It's a fair question, but a short, silent clip without a verified timestamp can't fully answer it either way, and it hasn't stopped online commentators from speculating that the footage could have been staged or simply reshot until it looked right. There's a second, quieter thread worth pulling on here, the way the group's own account of that night has moved over time. In the earliest version, the story kept Bart away from the scene of Nolan's disappearance almost entirely. It was only later, once the friends went on what amounted to a public speaking tour of interviews, that Warren introduced the detail of going upstairs to talk boats with one of the fathers, a detail that wasn't part of the initial telling. Some analysts reviewing those early statements have pointed to Warren specifically, arguing that he talked more than the others, and that in doing so he inadvertently revealed details that complicated the group's account rather than simplified it. Combine that with the fact that the friends had immediate possession of Nolan's phone, not a belief that he'd simply stayed behind with a girl, but physical custody of his device, and you get the argument some have made, that the group knew something was wrong well before they said anything to anyone. While all of that was unfolding on the water, Nolan's mother, Christine Wensley, was trying to reach her son from home. Her phone records show she called around 8 p.m. and again near 10:48 p.m. No one from the group had reached out to tell her anything was wrong. At 11:07 p.m., Warren Hudson finally called her. And according to Christine, what he told her didn't match what she knew about her son. He said, "Oh, well, you know, when we went to the island, there was a girl named Katie that he met, and he had decided to stay behind." I said, "What?" Because we know our child. Nolan isn't one to just throw caution to the wind. She also learned in that same call that the group had Nolan's phone. He'd left it on the boat. To Christine, that was the second red flag. She says Nolan never went anywhere without his phone, that he'd wake her up in the mornings holding it in her face as a joke. A teenager who never lets go of his phone, gone overnight, and the device sitting in someone else's possession. What followed was a chain of jurisdictional dead ends that would be almost darkly comic if a family's son weren't missing in the middle of it. The Department of Marine Resources told her it might not be their jurisdiction. The Coast Guard and Ocean Springs Police told her a report had to be filed in person. A hospital stop turned up nothing. Eventually, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office agreed to take the report in a McDonald's parking lot after midnight. He was just like, "Okay, thanks." And I was like, "Where's the urgency?" By Christine's account, no search boats were on the water that night. It was Nolan's own family, his parents, his former high school football coach, and a family friend, who chartered a boat the next morning and were the first ones back out to the island, walking the shoreline themselves. That same morning, according to Christine, her own phone worked without issue, including a nearly complete call with her grandmother while she was still near the water, which puts her account in direct tension with the friend group's repeated description of the island's reception as too poor to be trusted. The friends themselves say they weren't sitting idle either. By their account, several of them, including Wyatt, Trayson, and Morgan, went back out to Horn Island the next morning in a boat borrowed from Nolan's own high school football coach, who'd texted that he had a vessel available. When they arrived, they found roughly 7 Department of Marine Resources boats and park rangers already working the area. They gave their information, confirmed they'd been present the day before, and split the island in two, one group covering the north side, the other the south, checking rip currents, channel markers, and floating debris. We got in the boat, we rowed out to the island. There was 7 DMR boats already out there, and park rangers. We talked to them, gave them all of our information. They also say they later handed their own phones over voluntarily to the FBI for forensic extraction, a detail their attorney has repeatedly pointed to as evidence of cooperation, even as the question of Nolan's own phone remained unresolved on the family's side of the ledger. There's also the matter of what happened to the phones that stayed behind on the boat that day. According to the group, roughly 15 phones, Nolan's and several others, including a friend named Javon's, were left on the dashboard rather than carried into the water, a common practice given the salt and the risk of damage. After the boat returned to the mainland, the phones were moved from the boat into vehicles and then into the house. The friends maintained that none of them knew Nolan's passcode, had no reason to try to access his phone, and that the only handling involved was physically moving it from one place to another before handing it over. He left the phone on the boat because we're trustworthy people. We're not going to steal something. We're not going to delete pictures off of someone's phone. According to Christine and Elmore Wensley, 3 separate details didn't hold up the night Nolan went missing. First, that Nolan had voluntarily stayed behind with a girl he'd just met, something both parents say was completely out of character. Second, that he'd left his phone behind at all, given how attached to it he reportedly was. Third, when Elmore went to retrieve Nolan's car and asked for the keys, one of the young men, Jack, initially said he couldn't find them. It wasn't until another friend, on the phone with someone who'd been present that day, identified the keys sitting in plain sight on top of an Xbox that they turned up. Elmore counted 3 successive falsehoods in a single night. The friend group has since directly disputed this characterization. In the interview with Tatum, they say the phone was handed over the moment it was asked for, and the keys were found and handed over within about 30 seconds of being asked. No argument, no delay. So this narrative that they're pushing, that there was any argument over the phone or the keys, that's completely false. Both versions can't be fully true at once, and neither has been independently corroborated on camera or by police report as of this recording. What we do know from both sides is that a large group, reportedly 10 to 15 people, arriving in 4 or 5 vehicles, showed up at one friend's house that same night, pressed hard for information, and left with the phone in hand. Some of that group photographed license plates in the driveway. Police were eventually called to disperse the crowd around 2 in the morning. There's also a clothing detail that both sides now agree got corrected. Official missing person notices and the final photograph described Nolan in navy or dark blue swim trunks, shirtless, wearing sunglasses. But in the panic of that first night, members of the group hesitated on the color. At least one initially said black before correcting to navy. They ultimately relied on a photograph taken with a small, non-phone camera belonging to one of the girls on the boats to settle it, and that photo was what Nolan's mother posted publicly to help with the search. Separately, the United Cajun Navy, one of the volunteer groups involved in the search, issued its own correction after earlier reports had mistakenly described Nolan's clothing as a full outfit rather than swim trunks. Small details, but the kind that matter when a family is trying to get an accurate description into the hands of searchers within hours of losing contact with their son. Drop a comment with which account you believe doesn't hold up, the family's or the friend group. We're going to be reading through those as this case develops. Now, the part of this case that has dominated timelines and comment sections for days. And we're going to be careful here, because careful is exactly what this moment calls for. An enhanced version of the CTOW audio began circulating online, with some listeners reporting they could make out background phrases, "Nolan, wake up, is he dead?" and, right near the end, what some heard as "damn it, Bart." From there, a theory took shape, that Bart Edmiston Jr., a former high school teammate of Nolan's and a University of Wyoming punter with a real shot at pro football, was somehow responsible for what happened to Nolan, and that his status and his family's standing in the community were being used to build a cover story. We want to state plainly what this is: an online theory built from an audio enhancement that has not been authenticated, that has been directly and specifically denied by the people involved. It is not an established fact, and we're not going to present it as one. Here's what we can say about how it's spread and how it's been challenged. One version of the theory ties a specific photograph, Bart standing next to a young woman, to Katie, suggesting a prior relationship and a motive rooted in jealousy. Bart's own attorney has addressed this directly and specifically. Somebody literally went and pulled a picture of my client with a young lady that was several years old and then misidentified the young lady as someone named Katie. The problem with that line of reasoning is that the person in the photograph upon which the entire theory is based is not in fact someone named Katie. That's a direct, on-the-record rebuttal to the specific piece of evidence the theory was built on. Not a vague denial, but a challenge to the actual photo. University of Wyoming's head coach also went on record stating Bart had never been named a suspect and that no information had linked him to the incident, directing further questions to Bart's attorney. What's driving continued suspicion, for those who believe there's more to find, isn't really the audio clip on its own. It's the pattern around it. It's the fact that Bart, unlike several of his friends, has not spoken publicly. It's the shifting details in the group's account, including Warren's addition in a later interview, of a private conversation upstairs with one of the fathers that hadn't been part of the earliest version of events. It's the CTOW call and cancellation happening in near lockstep. And it's the broader, well-documented pattern in some communities of local influence shaping the pace and shape of an investigation. A real historical concern that shows up again and again in cases involving Black victims, and one Nolan's family's attorneys have raised explicitly without ever endorsing the Bart did it framing themselves. That distinction matters. The family's own legal team, Ben Crump, Eric Hertz, Lisa Park, and Ahmad Smith, have been careful publicly not to name a suspect or assign blame. Their stated position is that they want a transparent, complete investigation and are prepared to accept whatever the evidence actually shows. We stand for the truth, no matter whom it implicates or exonerates, for justice, no matter whom it convicts or acquits, and for transparency. So here's where we land on this. The audio has not been independently authenticated. The photo the jealousy theory rests on has been specifically disputed by Bart's attorney. No charges have been filed against anyone. And the family driving the push for a federal investigation has not attached a name to their public demand. What remains is a set of real, documented inconsistencies in the friend group's account, sitting alongside an unverified theory that has, for now, gone further in public conversation than the evidence currently supports. That's the uncomfortable truth about a case like this. The loudest theory isn't always the most solid one, and the actual record moves a lot slower than the comment section does. If you want to be here when the next real development lands, not just the next viral clip, make sure you're subscribed. We track this one closely, and we only report what's actually verifiable. 6 weeks in, the case's center of gravity has shifted to Nolan's phone, and to who has, or hasn't, examined it. The friend group's attorney, Tyler Cox, has stated publicly that he doesn't believe the family has cooperated with law enforcement and that nothing is missing from Nolan's phone. Legal analyst Nancy Grace flagged the obvious tension in that second claim on air. If the friends maintain they never accessed the phone, they have no basis to know whether anything was deleted from it. How can you say that there's text missing or there's photographs? Our boys had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back. The family's position, laid out by attorney Lisa Park, is procedural rather than adversarial. They're asking for a single, joint forensic examination, the Jackson County DA's office, the family's own forensic team, and potentially the FBI, all present at the same time, downloading and examining the device once. Park compared it to how a serious car accident gets investigated, everyone present for one inspection, rather than evidence changing hands piecemeal. We're ready for it to happen. We're waiting for the DA to determine the time, the place, the date. Digital forensics specialists brought into the conversation, Heather Barnhart and Tanya Jordan, laid out why the timeline matters so much. A full file system extraction of the physical device can recover deletion traces that cloud backups alone can't show. And platforms like Snapchat only hold undelivered content for a limited window, up to 30 days, meaning that with more than a month already gone by, some of that window may already be closing, if it hasn't closed already. If it's not handed over to authorities now, it needs to be, because this was over a month ago now. Alongside the phone fight, the family's legal team confirmed that the Congressional Black Caucus sent a formal letter to the FBI and the Department of Justice on August 12th, requesting an independent federal investigation and specifically raising the possibility of a federal civil rights review. Because Horn Island is federal land, the family argues federal jurisdiction is not just appropriate but necessary. The letter set a 7-day deadline for a response, a deadline that, as of the family's most recent press conference, had not yet passed. Attorney Ben Crump also used that same appearance to defend the online reporting around this case on First Amendment grounds, while drawing a clear line of his own. There's an important difference between knowingly spreading false information and asking questions, examining evidence, identifying inconsistencies, expressing opinions, and demanding transparency. Attorney Eric Hertz added that extensive communications with the district attorney's office had already taken place, communications he described as confidential, while affirming that the family had cooperated throughout and would continue to. His point was simple. The lawyer's duty runs first to their clients, which means not everything discussed with the DA's office gets aired publicly, even when the public is hungry for updates. Reverend Al Sharpton, appearing alongside the family's legal team, raised a separate and uncomfortable thread that parents of some of the young men who'd been with Nolan had threatened to sue the family and their attorneys simply for raising questions about what happened on July 4th. Whatever the merits of that threat, it underscores how far this case has traveled from a missing person report into something closer to a legal standoff on multiple fronts at once. Attorney Ben Crump also used a National Association of Black Journalists appearance to publicly thank the people who'd stepped in with reward money for information, Reverend Sharpton, Tyler Perry, Terrell Owens, and Byron Allen among them, framing the rewards as a shared objective rather than a competition. Everyone, he said, wants the same thing, which is the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells, and every day that goes by without it is a day that costs the family more. That line is worth sitting with, because it's the same standard we're trying to hold to here. Question the record, flag the contradictions, and stop short of declaring guilt the evidence hasn't established. That same broadcast surfaced a smaller contradiction worth flagging on its own, because it says something about how quickly certainty can outrun the facts in a case like this. Officer Tatum told viewers, based on his understanding, that most of the young men had taken polygraph examinations and passed, all but Warren. Pressed for precision, he corrected himself on air. The tests weren't traditional polygraphs at all, but computer voice stress analysis, a tool that isn't admissible in court. And Warren, he clarified, hadn't taken any test at all. Nancy Grace noted this wasn't the first time in the same conversation that a claim stated with confidence had needed walking back, pointing to Tatum's earlier assertion that Nolan's family hadn't turned over his phone, an inference he'd drawn from the phrase "prepared to cooperate" rather than from any confirmed fact. "Are you back on the phone?" Because you don't know, you've already said you don't know where the phone is. It could be sitting on the sheriff's desk for all I know. She used the image of a jar of muddy water to describe where the public record actually stood. Still unsettled and not yet clear enough to support the firm conclusions being drawn from it in real time. Let's lay out, plainly, what we know and don't know. The most recent word from the family came at a press conference on August 13th, held at the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Atlanta. There, the family confirmed they accept the preliminary findings of the independent autopsy conducted by Dr. Roger Mitchell on July 10th. Cause and manner of death both listed as undetermined, pending further investigation. Dr. Mitchell, the family said, remains available and is waiting on authorization from the district attorney's office and the medical examiner to proceed with further examination. The attorneys also laid out the legal groundwork already in motion. Preservation letters had gone out early to multiple parties, using the standard language that litigation is reasonably anticipated. A phrase the family stressed was about locking down evidence, not announcing a lawsuit. An independent investigation, they said, is already underway, covering witness interviews, oceanographic expertise, and digital forensics. And because Horn Island sits on federal land, the family has pushed for federal review from the start, a request now backed by the Congressional Black Caucus letter. We know Nolan Wells went to Horn Island on July 4th with a group of friends and never came home. We know his phone stayed on the boat and was in his friend's possession that night. We know a sea tow call was placed and then abruptly canceled by the boat owner's grandfather within minutes. We know the friend group's account of that night has changed in at least one material way between their first statements and their later interview: the addition of an upstairs conversation about boats. We know Nolan's family disputes several specific claims made by the friend group, and the friend group disputes several specific claims made by the family, and that neither side's version has been fully independently verified. We know an independent autopsy conducted on July 10th listed both cause and manner of death as undetermined, with red discoloration and questions about throat structures cited among the open medical questions. We know the family has requested, and not yet received, a joint forensic examination of Nolan's phone. And we know the Congressional Black Caucus has now formally asked the DOJ and FBI to open an independent federal review. We do not know what happened to Nolan Wells in the hours after that boat pulled away from Horn Island. We do not know whether the enhanced audio contains what some listeners believe it does. We do not know whether the theory attached to Bart Edmiston's name has any basis beyond a disputed photograph and an unauthenticated recording, and his attorney has directly challenged the specific evidence it's built on. What we do know is that a mother made repeated phone calls no one returned, that a family was bounced between 4 different agencies before anyone would take a missing person report, and that 6 weeks later, the most basic piece of evidence in the case, a teenager's phone, still hasn't been jointly examined by everyone who has a stake in finding the truth. Ben Crump said it plainly at that press conference: the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, no matter who it implicates, no matter who it clears. That's the standard this case deserves. Not a name repeated until it sticks. The actual record, followed all the way through, wherever it leads. Somewhere tonight, Christine Wensley is still waiting on a phone call that actually answers her question. That's not a headline, that's a mother. If this case has stuck with you the way it stuck with us, tell us in the comments what part of this timeline you think investigators need to explain next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment that phone finally gets examined. And share this with someone who's only heard the Bart Did It version, because this family deserves to have the full record follow them, not just the loudest theory. We'll be back with updates the moment the federal response comes in. Until then, that's what the record shows.